talk to me. I don't want to be the one monopolizing the conversation. So tell me what you want to know from me, or just tell me what's on your heart.
Well, just going to the law library as much as I have, I see a lot of cases. I've heard a lot of cases around here, guys. I've seen a lot of cases where the DA or the judge have had a lot of misconduct, but the judge has ruled say, well, it's not egregious enough, or it's not that that wow factor enough to really sway in the defendant's favors. I'm looking at the things that I know. I mean, I've never dealt with a law before. With all this, I'm winging it in the law library as I am. And, God directed me through little things like through the poisonous tree, the Brady law, and different cases that, just it pops out of nowhere, but I know what God is putting in front of me. And I see all these things that relate to my case. I just don't know, how to frame this, where, when I do this 35C, I've had this paperwork with me for probably a couple months, and I know I only have a year left to appeal some of those Class B and C felonies that have a 3-year limit or 2-year limit, and I really want to figure this out where I can do it in the right time frame, but also not rushing anything. And I just want to get out of here. I know that God has a plan for me, and it's to be in prison right now, but it's not stay here. Because He brought me here for a reason. But He also wants me to do something on the outside. I know I just can't sit here and just wait for it. I know there's waiting, doing nothing, and there's waiting that seeking an action, or that's what I'm doing. But I also want to know what action to take, because I have no intellect when it comes to the law. But I know He can teach me, and that's what I'm just waiting for. Things that all clean, I still know how to do it.
I got you. And you don't have the benefit of an attorney that is in your hip pocket, so to speak. Okay, I've got a couple of attorneys here I can talk to that can maybe help. Get some good results, get some good advice for you in terms of forms and what to say, things like that. That's not going to be an overnight process for me to, get the results, we want. It's going to take some time, but, I'm not saying overnight, but I am saying maybe several days or a week or so. So let me see what I can do along those lines. Because I know you're in a tough spot, and it's how do you know how to do something when you don't know what it is you need to do? So it's tough. So I get it.
It's trial by error thing, but I know when the law is you're gonna run into certain things where the motion's gonna get denied, or whatever I write down, the judge might think, well, that's not. What you're claiming isn't enough to go back to. You're not warranted to trial. You're not warranted to have the appeal granted. Denied. I was like, well, how do I do that?
Yeah.
And I don't want to get disheartened when that happens. I know it'll probably happen at some point. But not all motions are all appeals or granted. That's why I want to make sure I write this the right way. Where when it goes there, they see oh well. Do I put everything down that I know, or just I don't want to put everything down so they know everything that I'm on.
Well, okay, let me address a couple of things in what you just said. First of all, you live in a closed society now. Every door is shut in your face. You cannot go from one. You go to one wall, you can't go further. You got to turn your left, you can't go any further. So you know what I'm saying? You're in this perpetual. This room with no door, so you cannot get through. You got that? You understand that? What I'm trying to say? So your world is controlled. You hear the word no probably more than you hear the word yes in that system. So one thing you need to be very accustomed to is being denied, being turned down, being told no. You with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, some people will lose hope very, very quickly because everywhere they turn, time they talk to someone, they're hearing things they don't want to hear. They're being told no. You can't do this. You can't have that. You can't go here. You can't go there. Whatever legal action you're trying to do.
Attorney's call may be monitored and recorded.
Whatever you're trying to do, you're always being told no. What you can't do is allow yourself to lose hope. Don't take no for an answer. And don't give up the first time you're told no. You understand?
Yeah.
So the key in all this is you got to be strong. You got to be physically strong. You got to be mentally strong. And you've got to understand that, you know what? You're the underdog, but underdogs can win. They can be a dog in the fight. So I want you to get this attitude that no matter what you do, we're not going to take no for an answer. They tell us no, we're going to try again. They tell us no again, we're going to try again. You just got to keep persevering and don't lose hope, okay? Because I'll tell you what, you lose hope, you lose your life. All right? Attitude about all that, and don't take any steps back. Just keep moving forward. Even if it's a small step, move forward and not backward. Okay?
Okay. Just like in my devotional today, it was Miss Esther. It was a door of hope, and the Lord was speaking to Esther, and she was saying to the Lord, I've led you to the wilderness, but I will plant in that wilderness vineyards. If you're going through the valley of Kor, which is the valley of trouble, I will put a door of hope. So even though you're in a wilderness, you're going to plant vineyards in that wilderness. Though you're in the valley of trouble, there's going to be a door of hope in that trouble.
That's great.
By the time Chris Watts picked up the phone, his world had already collapsed. He was no longer the quiet Colorado husband giving interviews on his driveway, no longer pretending his family had simply vanished. He was sitting in custody, stripped of control, reputation, and the carefully maintained image he had lived behind for years. And on the other end of the line was his lawyer, one of the few people still speaking to him without judgment. What followed would become one of the most unsettling moments tied to the case. This wasn't a dramatic confession or a courtroom breakdown. It was something quieter, colder. A private conversation that exposed fear, desperation, and a man realizing too late that there was no escape route left. During the call, Chris spoke about his surroundings, his state of mind, and the growing pressure closing in on him. At one point, he made it clear he didn't believe he could stay where he was. "I can't stay here." Those words weren't about discomfort. They were about fear. By then, Chris Watts understood that the narrative had shifted completely. The evidence was mounting. The sympathy he once received from the public had evaporated. And inside custody, he wasn't just another inmate, he was that inmate. The man whose crimes had already begun to spread beyond headlines and into whispers, stares, and threats. The call revealed something interviews never did. Panic. Not the kind that shows itself through tears or shouting, but the kind that slips through controlled sentences and careful phrasing. He spoke like someone calculating risk, weighing his own safety, trying to figure out how much worse things could get, and how fast. For years, Chris Watts had avoided confrontation. He avoided conflict in his marriage, avoided honesty with those closest to him, avoided responsibility until avoidance was no longer possible. And now, in a place where control was gone and reputation meant nothing, that instinct to run had nowhere left to go. The phone call didn't make him more human. It made him more exposed. And as the conversation went on, it became clear that the fear he was expressing wasn't regret over what he had done. It was fear of what was about to happen to him. Inside those walls, the reality of his actions wasn't something he could explain away with a calm voice or a rehearsed line. It was something he had to live with, and for the first time, Chris what seemed to understand that staying put might be the most dangerous thing of all. As the call continued, Chris Watts tried to sound composed, but the cracks were impossible to miss. He spoke carefully, choosing his words the same way he always had. Calm, polite, almost detached. Yet beneath that surface was a growing awareness that the situation was spiraling beyond anything he could manage. This wasn't about legal strategy anymore. This was about survival. Chris explained to his lawyer that he was scared. Not in a vague way, but specifically scared of where he was and what could happen next. He understood how inmates viewed men accused of killing children. He understood the hierarchy, the unspoken rules, and the consequences. In that environment, the details of his case weren't just known, they were dangerous. "I can't stay here," he repeated. What stood out most wasn't desperation, it was calculation. He wasn't asking for comfort. He wasn't expressing remorse. He was assessing risk, trying to determine whether a transfer was possible, whether his current placement could be changed before things turned violent. For the first time, Chris was no longer hiding from his image. He knew exactly what people thought of him now. The same man who once worried about keeping up appearances in his neighborhood was now worried about staying alive in custody. The lawyer listened, measured and professional, offering no false reassurance. There were processes, he explained. Paperwork. Time. Nothing would move quickly. And that delay, the waiting, seemed to unsettle Chris more than anything else. Because waiting meant exposure. In that moment, the calm voice he used so often worked against him. There was no emotional outburst to distract from the truth. No confusion. Just a man realizing that the consequences of his actions had finally caught up to him in a place where manipulation, charm, and silence offered no protection. This call wasn't meant for the public. It wasn't staged. And that's why it matters. It revealed a side of Chris Watts that interviews never showed. Not a grieving husband, not a cooperative suspect, but someone confronted with the reality that his crimes had placed him in permanent danger. A man who understood, perhaps for the first time, that there would be no resetting his life, no starting over quietly somewhere else. There was only the system, and inside it nowhere left to hide. After the call ended, nothing actually changed, and that was the point. Chris Watts remained exactly where he was, inside a system that moved slowly and without sympathy. Requests didn't mean action. Fear didn't mean urgency. Whatever panic he felt on that phone call had no power once the line went dead. And that reality settled in quickly. By this stage, investigators had already pieced together much of what happened. His earlier story had collapsed under evidence, timelines, and his own contradictions. The calm interviews that once confused the public now looked hollow in hindsight. Inside custody, that same calm no longer worked as camouflage. It marked him as someone trying too hard to remain unaffected. Other inmates noticed. Chris was no longer just another man awaiting the next step in a legal process. His name carried weight, and not the kind that earns respect. Word travels fast in places like that, faster than paperwork, faster than official decisions. And Chris knew it. That knowledge sat behind every careful sentence he spoke, every measured breath. The fear he expressed to his lawyer wasn't hypothetical. It was rooted in understanding exactly how men convicted of crimes like his are treated, not by policy but by people. There are no interviews to explain yourself. No second chances to reshape the narrative. Inside, actions define you permanently. And his actions had already done that. What's striking is what Chris didn't say during the call. There was no mention of his daughters by name. No reflection on the loss of his family. No expression of guilt that extended beyond his own circumstances. The focus remained narrow, fixed on his position, his safety, his future. It wasn't denial anymore. It was acceptance of consequence, just not responsibility. As days passed, the urgency in his voice gave way to resignation. There would be no immediate transfer, no quiet solution, no escape from what his name now represented. The man who once believed he could control every outcome was now learning what it meant to have none. The phone call stands out not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest in a way nothing else had been. Not honest about remorse, honest about fear. honest about self-preservation, honest about the moment he realized that the walls around him weren't temporary. They were permanent, and no matter where he was moved, those walls would follow. As time went on, one truth became impossible for Chris Watts to avoid. A transfer wouldn't change what he had become. Whether he stayed where he was or was moved somewhere else, his name would follow him. In correctional facilities, cases like his don't fade into the background. They define a person completely, and Chris knew that any new location would come with the same recognition, the same tension, the same unspoken threat. The fear that surfaced during that call with his lawyer wasn't just about a specific place. It was about the realization that there was no safe version of incarceration for him. No corner where his past could be ignored. No environment where his crimes would lose their weight. The system he had entered was designed to be permanent, and for someone like Chris, permanence meant exposure. For years, he had relied on silence and compliance to avoid conflict. He let others lead, others decide, others speak for him. But inside prison walls, silence isn't neutrality, it's vulnerability. The very traits that once helped him blend in now worked against him. And still, there was no public apology. No moment of accountability that reached beyond his own fear. The concern remained focused inward, centered on survival rather than reflection. The call with his lawyer had stripped away the illusion that this was temporary, that something might still shift in his favor. Nothing would. That quiet phone conversation now stands as one of the most revealing moments in the case. Not because it exposed new facts, but because it exposed motive not for the crime but for the man himself. Control, avoidance, self-preservation at all costs. In the end, "I can't stay here" wasn't really about where he was being held. It was about the fact that there was nowhere left to go. And as the reality of his sentence set in, so did the understanding that this would be his life, watched, judged, and defined by a single irreversible choice. If this breakdown gave you deeper insight into the case, like and subscribe to Dark Corner True Crime for more carefully researched, factual stories told with clarity and respect. The silence may have followed the call, but the consequences never stopped speaking. With time, the call became more than just a moment of fear. It became a lens. Separated from interviews, court appearances, and official statements, that quiet conversation with his lawyer revealed Chris Watts in a way nothing else did. There was no audience to persuade, no public image to manage. Just a man confronting the reality that the life he built and destroyed had led him to a place where fear was constant and control was gone. What stood out most was how clearly the call exposed his priorities. Even at that stage, the concern wasn't centered on the lives lost or the devastation left behind. It was centered on consequences as they applied to him. Safety, placement, survival. The same inward focus that had shaped his decisions long before the crime was still present afterward. In many ways, the call mirrored the pattern of his life. When pressure mounted, Chris didn't confront it, he tried to escape it. When escape was no longer possible, fear took its place. The difference now was that there were no options left to consider, no paths to quietly step away from the damage. The system doesn't forget, and neither do the people inside it. Over time, the call has taken on a kind of permanence in true crime discussions because it captures the exact moment when illusion met reality. The moment he understood that there would be no version of his future untouched by what he had done. No amount of calm demeanor, cooperation, or compliance could undo it. "I can't stay here" became more than a statement of fear. It became an acknowledgement, not of guilt but of finality. For audiences, the call serves as a reminder that the most revealing moments in criminal cases aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're found in private conversations, where the focus shifts from performance to self-preservation. Where the truth isn't spoken outright, but implied through what is emphasized, and what is noticeably absent. Chris Watts will spend the rest of his life defined by that absence. And the call remains, not as a plea for understanding, but as evidence of a man finally trapped by the consequences he spent years trying to avoid. In the end, the call didn't change anything. Chris Watts still faced the same sentence, the same reality, and the same permanent consequences. But what that conversation did leave behind was clarity. Stripped of interviews and public performance, it revealed a man whose greatest fear wasn't exposure. It was endurance. Living day after day inside a reality he could no longer control. "I can't stay here" wasn't a cry for justice or understanding. It was the sound of someone realizing that avoidance had finally run out. That there would be no more quiet exits, no fresh starts, no versions of the story left to rewrite. For those who follow this case, the call stands as a chilling reminder that accountability doesn't always arrive with remorse. Sometimes it arrives as fear. Fear of being seen for exactly who you are, with nowhere left to hide and nowhere else to go. And long after the phone line went silent, the truth remained. Consequences don't end when the conversation does. If stories like this matter to you, if you value careful, factual narration without sensationalism, like and subscribe to Dark Corner True Crime for more in-depth examinations of the cases that still haunt us. Because in the darkest corners, it's often the quiet moments that speak the loudest.